We've taken a look at ecology at the organismal and population levels. Now we're going to take a look at ecology at the community and ecosystem levels. When we talk about a community, there are 4 different properties of a community that we can study. The diversity, the prevalent form of vegetation, stability, and the trophic structure. Now in diversity, we're talking about the variety of different kinds of organisms that make up the community. Diversity has 2 main components, what we call species richness and relative abundance. Species richness is basically the total number of different species. So the more species rich something is, the more different kinds of species there are in the community. The less species rich, the less amount of different kinds of species there are in the community. And then relative abundance is how many of the different kinds of species are there. So species diversity includes both components of species richness and relative abundance. The second property of a community is the prevalence of the vegetation found in that area. And this usually just mainly applies to land communities. So the type and structure of different plants in the area is going to determine the type of animals that are present in that area and are able to survive. So if we're talking about deciduous trees that live in a temperate forest, they have they're very tall, they've got a canopy of small shrubs down near the bottom, so they're going to have certain types of animals be able to survive in that community versus deserts that are just cactus vegetation and very small shrubs. The third component of communities is the stability of the community, the ability of that community to resist change, and if there is change, to return to that original condition after if there's any kind of disturbance like fire, tornadoes, floods. So as an example, cedar and hemlock forests can live thousands and thousands of years. But if they are destroyed, if these dominant trees are destroyed, it is going to obviously take a lot of time to return to that original condition with the very tall old trees in that community. The last property of communities is the trophic structure. This is the feeding relationships among the various species in that community. And this trophic structure is going to determine the passage of energy and nutrients from the producers, right, the autotrophs, the plants in that community, to the different levels of consumers or heterotrophs in that community. All right, so let's take a look at the interactions between species in a community, because this is going to affect who survives, who doesn't, and at which rate. So competition between species basically is because 2 or more species in a community are relying on similar resources. Okay, so this is called interspecific competition. So we've got competition for nesting sites, insects for food, shelters, to live in, etc. Those are all things that species are going to compete for. Here's a little study on competition that a Russian ecologist performed. He basically studied the interaction of 2 species of paramecium, so little single-celled organisms. Now, if grown separately, these 2 paramecium survive and thrive just fine. In fact, they both show that basic S curve, that logistics growth curve that we saw in the last lecture. But if we grow them together, then we get a very different view. Okay, so here's before with our little S curves. Okay, if we grow them together, one of them dies. Okay, the blue paramecium dies out over time, and this is due to the competition between these 2 paramecium for food and space within the little petri dish. So when species compete and one species has an advantage over the other, that's what we call competitive exclusion principle. Okay, they're just basically going to exclude the other species, and the other one is going to die off. Now we can see when we look at communities of organisms that there are definitely all different kinds of species, even all different kinds of plant species that can survive. So competitive exclusion occurs at some rate, but not, for everything. It's not like, if the big tall trees dominate, therefore everything else dies. No, there's what we call ecological niches. Okay, and basically this is, the total of a species' use of biotic and abiotic resources in the environment. So we can have different plant species, use or take up different niches within that community. So, as the very tall trees are, growing tall, taking the sunlight that hits, the top of the canopy, we can still get smaller plant species down below using the sunlight and other abiotic factors that are creeping through the canopy and going down to, the bottom of that foresty area. So when different species take up different, niches around the community, they're going to, be able to survive at different temperature ranges. They're going to, be able to survive different heights, using, eating different types of insects, or even coming out at different times of the day. Okay, so like nocturnal species perform, or take over that niche of, being nighttime organisms that are awake in the night and feeding on things and using up resources at night, versus the diurnal species that are out during the day and using resources during the day. So there's different niches that organisms can fulfill. And fulfilling these different niches has come about through resource partitioning. So, competition leading to the elimination of a species, or if those two species can survive, one of them survives by evolving to use different resources. So, a class, good example that I was just talking about is the diurnal species versus nocturnal species. Okay, so they're partitioning their resources. One type of species is out during the day using the resources. One type of species is out at night using the resources. So it's resource partitioning. All right, let's take a look at trophic structure of predation. So the consumer is a predator, and the food source is what we call prey, right? So the prey is what gets eaten, the predator is who eats it. And predation is very important to adaptive evolution. Okay, it's a very big factor when we're talking about adaptive evolution. Because over time, if a species has come to elude its predator, then it will change, evolve, and be able to survive better, while that predator may decrease in population size. Predators, the ones who are eating the other species, have come to have some common adaptations, either acute sense of sight or smell to find their prey, having teeth in order to easily catch and devour prey, along with fangs, claws, and stingers, or poison in order to maim or kill or stun their prey. So all of these adaptations have come over time in order for those predators to be able to survive easier in the environment. Now the prey also have adaptations against the predators. So if we're talking about plants, some plant defenses against herbivores include basically, having chemical toxins, because they can't run, so they can't move, so they can't just, you don't see a tree uprooting itself and running away. So they have to have some, more internal or chemical defenses. So we have chemical toxins such as nicotine and morphine, tannins, and then also some physical defenses as well, like spines and thorns and other features that would lead the predator to maybe not bother with them. Animals, just like plants, are also going to have some defenses against predators. We can have passive defenses like hiding, and active defenses like escaping or defending themselves, or calling an alarm. We have distraction displays like simulated injury. Oh, I'm lame. Don't eat me. Um, you know, such things as camouflage, okay, being able to blend into the environment, and or being able to mimicry, being able to mimic another dangerous or poisonous species that the predator would stay away from, because it knows that if I eat that, I get sick or die. Something that most people don't really think about is that this predator-prey relationship actually preserves the diversity within a community. The main predator in a community is what we call a keystone predator. If you take them away, then their prey all of a sudden increases, greatly, and crowds out all the other species. And so that can happen, as an example here, with this mussel-eating sea star. Okay, so if we take a look at the number of species present, when in that whole community, the number of different types of species present in that whole community, with the sea star, it's pretty stable. Okay, the mussel-eating sea star. If you take the mussel-eating sea star away, then we don't get as much diversity. Okay, the mussels start to take over, crowding everybody else out, and we don't get much diversity. So predator-prey relationships are actually a good thing in nature. Now, not all relationships in a community are predator-prey, okay, killing to eat. We also have what's called symbiotic relationships. Parasitism is one symbiotic relationship. It's where one is benefited and the other one is harmed, but not necessarily killed or killed quickly. Okay, so you can think of, I remember those roundworms that we studied when we studied the different types of animals in the kingdom. Roundworms are a great parasite, both in animals and in humans, and they obviously are benefited when they get into the gut of an animal and are able to eat and flourish and reproduce, but that animal is definitely harmed, is very sickly, and could even die at the towards the end. But it's not a predator-prey relationship, as the it's not like the the roundworm is seeking out to hunt and kill the human or the dog or something. It's just a symbiotic relationship where the roundworm is using the resources within the animal, and if the animal cannot adapt or get rid of the roundworm, then it dies eventually over time. Mutualism is another type of symbiotic relationship, and this is where both species are going to benefit. So, even though, so one example is, birds eating fruit and spreading the seeds around. So the birds benefit by having food, and the trees also benefit by having their seeds being spread around the area, so, to increase the chance of survival of that species. Okay, so when we take a look at different communities, the different communities are going to be established in two different ways, two different possible ways that communities can be established in a certain area. First way is called primary succession. So this is where a community arises from a pretty much lifeless area with no or little soil. So you've got lots of dirt and rocks and stuff like that, but there's not really any good nutrients. So what happens is that some very small species like moss and lichen are able to survive and use the resources within the rocks and just the plain dirt. And over time, as they are there using those resources, putting them back into the environment, dying, then we can get fungus coming over and decomposing the bodies, And slowly, 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 we get, a buildup of nutrient-rich soil. So once that nutrient-rich soil is kind of, there and established, we can get bigger, okay, slightly bigger plants coming in, okay, which might attract some small animals. And again, as we get more and more soil, we get bigger and bigger and bigger species, okay, and more animal species moving in, and bigger plant species as well. So that's kind of primary succession, which is starting from scratch. Now, secondary succession is a little different. Soil is actually already there. So we can think of secondary succession as if, a huge wildfire came through a forest and killed, and burned up all of the trees and plants and scared away all the animals of that area. Well, now to reestablish that area, we have secondary succession because we still have soil there. It's very nutrient-rich dirt is soil. So it's a lot easier and quicker for those plants to be reestablished back into that community. So when soil is intact, we can get secondary succession, and that happens at a much quicker rate than primary succession. Okay, we are going to finish up our study of ecology by taking a look at the ecosystem level of ecology. And so if we take a look at individuals in a population, populations in a community, and communities in big ecosystems, there's basically two key processes of ecosystems: chemical cycling and energy flow. Now, energy flow is basically the trophic relationships that determine as an ecosystem's energy flow and chemical cycling. So it's basically, what gets eaten by what in order to recycle the carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and all those other nutrients within an ecosystem. So if we take a look at these trophic levels, we basically can make what's called food chains. It's a sequence of food transfer from one trophic level to the next, where producers, are the plants on land and the phytoplankton in the oceans, and we always start our food chains with the producers. They're the only ones that can take photosynthetic energy and turn it into chemical energy. Now, in an ecosystem, the primary consumers are the ones that are eating these photosynthetic organisms or plants. So the primary consumers are what we call herbivores on land here, or in the ocean or marine ecosystem. They are the zooplankton that are going to be feeding again on the photosynthetic autotrophic organisms. Secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and quaternary consumers are all eating primary consumers or each other. It gets very complex depending on how many different species you have in the area that are eating each other. Detrivores are composers like bacteria and fungi, so they're the recyclers of the ecosystem. They'll take all the dead plant and animal matter and recycle those nutrients back into the soil. So food chains show the trophic level or trophic structure kind of in one direction. Plant to mouse to snake to hawk, okay? But more realistically, we actually have many more species in that community that are eating each other. We have omnivores that eat both plants and animals. And so we've got this huge kind of interconnection between all of these organisms. So it's actually better to represent these as food webs rather than just food chains. So here we have a picture of a food web, which is much more spread out than just the vertical food chain. And we can see all of the different types of trophic levels and trophic structures within this community and ecosystem. All right, when we focus on energy flow in the ecosystems, it's interesting to note that only 1% of visible light that reaches the plants and other producers is actually converted to chemical energy through photosynthesis. Okay, so the potential, there's 99% other potential to do that, but only 1% is actually, so it's actually kind of inefficient. Now, biomass is what we call, the amount of organic material produced each year. Okay, so how much photosynthetic organic material plants can produce per year. Now, primary productivity is the rate at which producers build organic matter, or this biomass. So, it's basically primary productivity is how much they can make in a year. So for the entire biosphere, so for all of the ecosystems on Earth, in a year, it's about 170 billion tons of biomass. Okay, now that's going to set a limit for energy use. Obviously, all organisms that are going to rely on these producers cannot consume or use more than 170 billion tons per year. So we're going to have, a limit on how many or how much energy is used, how many organisms survive to reproduce and such. Now, as we take a look at the flow of energy in an ecosystem, we can represent the cumulative loss of energy in a food chain as an energy pyramid. So 90% of energy is lost from one trophic level to the next. So if we take a look here, this is kind of a energy pyramid. In the producers in this community, we have the potential of having 10,000 kilocalories, of energy. Now, in the primary consumers, like the insects, they're eating these plants. That energy, 90% of that energy is lost to the environment, and about only 10% is moved on to the next level. So instead of 10,000 kilocalories like we have in producers, there's only going to be 1,000 calories in the insects that are available. And then again, if we go up one more trophic level, only 100 kilocalories in the next trophic level, 10 kilocalories in the next. And if we had one more, it would be only 1 kilocalorie of the total energy that it was possible from the original producers. So the second key factor in ecosystems, along with energy flow, is chemical cycling. Okay, because we can't have any of the plants make biomass if they don't have the the necessary nutrients in order to do photosynthesis. So chemical cycles involve both biotic and abiotic components of the environment. Okay, these are what we call biogeochemical cycles. So we can take a look at the cycling of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and water within an ecosystem, because those are the main nutrients that are needed in order to make biomass for the consumers to survive. Cycles are classified according to how mobile the chemicals are. So, for example, phosphorus is not found in the air. We don't find phosphorus as a gas, so that it is only cycled locally within an ecosystem through the soil. Okay, the soil is the main reservoir for phosphorus. Now, nitrogen and carbon can both be found in the atmosphere, so they can cycle globally. They can be pushed around the globe and take part in cycles, biogeochemical cycles, here in Marietta, as well as around the globe in China. So here's a very quick glimpse at the carbon cycle. Okay, so like I said, carbon is in the atmosphere as the CO2 gas, and so the atmosphere is basically the reservoir for carbon. Now, photosynthesis takes that carbon dioxide in to make glucose and releases oxygen. So, and then you remember the animals are going to eat the glucose in the plants and convert it back into carbon dioxide. So we get this cycling of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to the producers, to the consumers, to the atmosphere. We can also have the detrivores. Remember those bacteria and fungi who are breaking down dead plant and animal material. Also cycle carbon, from the dead material into the soil as well. So carbon can go from the biotic to the abiotic environments quite easily. Here is the nitrogen cycle. Now, nitrogen, again, is also found in our atmosphere, but the nitrogen gas found in our atmosphere can't be used by plants. So what we need are soil bacteria called nitrogen fixers or nitrifying bacteria that are converted either to ammonia or nitrate in the soil so that the plants can take up that nitrogen from the soil and convert it into the proteins and stuff that we need. So it's very important that we have these soil bacteria that are going to be taking the nitrogen from the atmosphere and converting it to a chemical basis that plants can actually use. Here's the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus, remember, again, is not found as a gas, as an atmospheric gas. So it's going to cycle locally in an area, and the main reservoir for phosphorus is in rocks. And so, again, it's important that we have the detrivores, the bacteria and the fungi that are around rocks. They're going to be breaking down rocks and returning turning phosphorus into a friendly kind of component in the soil so that plants can use it. Okay, and then also the detrivores will be breaking down any, again, plant and animal matter, in which the phosphorus again will be leached back out into the soil for more plants to use. All right, the last cycle that we're going to take a look at is the water cycle. So we have three processes within the water cycle: precipitation, evaporation, and transpiration, that are continuously moving water around in an ecosystem. So remember, precipitation is rain, sleet, or snow, water falling from the sky, basically. Evaporation is water, the sunlight heating up water molecules so that they vaporize and go up into the air. And then transpiration is water particles being transpired or breathed out with respiration of animals. Okay, so relative amount of water in each process is very important. So if we have lots of evaporation but very little precipitation, then that area is going to start going, it's going to start dehydrating, and it's not going to have a lot of water in that area. If we have lots of precipitation but very little evaporation, then we might, get flooding and too much water in that area. So the amount of water is very important to different aspects of the ecosystem. When we look at the relationship between biotic and abiotic factors, we see that there's a different distribution of what we call biomes around the Earth. So different types of ecosystems occur around the Earth depending on abiotic factors like climate and weather. So climate's going to affect the biome distribution. Remember, the equator is going to receive the greatest amount of solar radiation, and the poles are going to receive the least amount of solar radiation. So we're going to get different types of plants and animals and a diversity of plants and animals at different layers or different sections of the Earth. So if we're talking about those on land, the biomes on land, these are the terrestrial biomes. We can have tropical rainforests that are closer to the equator, savannas and deserts, that are also kind of near the equator, but don't have a lot of, moisture. Chaparral is the biome that is around here. Temperate grasslands and deciduous forests, to coniferous trees and the tundra near the colder parts of the poles. We've also got a lot of water on Earth, so obviously we're going to have plants and animals living in the water. So we've got freshwater biomes like lakes and ponds. And these guys are going to have different kind of layers within them because remember, sunlight can only travel so far through water. So we have, towards the top of the freshwater biomes, we have the photic zone where light can reach through. Okay, so we'll have photoplankton and other photosynthetic producers in that zone. Underneath that, when the light starts to, sunlight starts to get inefficient, we have what's called an aphotic zone. And then towards the bottom, where it's super dark and very, much colder, is the benthic zone. And usually it's just inhabited by bacteria. All right, last but not least, we also have our saltwater biomes or marine biomes. So estuaries is basically a place where fresh water meets salt water. Okay, so we can have different ecosystems within estuaries that are different than those that are found upstream in the freshwater versus out in the salty ocean. So estuaries are kind of like an in-between of freshwater and saltwater. Now, when we talk about the marine biomes, strictly the ocean biomes, we've got lots of different types of zones in which different plants and animals can survive. So the intertidal zone, is kind of where the ocean water is going to come up and meet the land. We have the continental shelf, which is basically, if you think about it, just off the shore. And then we've got, the photic zone, which can include the continental shelf. The photic zone is where, all the seaweed and kelp are going to be. And then beneath that, we've got a huge aphotic zone and the benthic zones near the very bottom. Now, in the very open sea, we have the pelagic zone, and that's going to be, towards the very, very bottom where there's hydrothermal vents and other kind of plate tectonic type things going on down there, which some species can survive down there. So mainly bacteria and the archaea that we've seen previously that can survive those extreme conditions are going to live there. So basically that is going to wrap up our ecology section of this course. And so we will move on to focusing on animal structure, function, body systems, and such.